Under the blood moon's crimson gaze, a single drop of eternal night fell upon the frozen throne, sealing fates in scarlet ice. The wind howled through the jagged peaks of the Silverfang Mountains like a chorus of forsaken souls, carrying the scent of pine resin and distant decay. Alara, once the cherished daughter of the Crimson Veil clan, now stumbled through the blinding snow, her bare feet numb against the unyielding frost. The rejection had come swiftly, a blade in the heart from her own kin. Impure, they had whispered, their eyes gleaming with the fanatic light of ancient prejudices. She was no true vampire, they claimed, her blood too thin, tainted by some forgotten human frailty that made her an omega in a world of predators. Banished at the edge of the eternal winter, left to the mercy of the storm that swallowed lesser beings whole. Her breath came in ragged gasps, misting the air like fragile ghosts. The cold clawed at her skin, seeping into the veins that should have burned with undying fire, but instead pulsed with a weary chill. Alara clutched the amulet at her throat, the central relic of her shattered lineage, a silver crescent moon encrusted with a single, preserved drop of her mother's blood, dark and viscous as midnight oil. It had been a gift on her naming day, symbol of the clan's eternal bond, the lunar pact that bound vampires to the night's embrace. Now it felt like a curse, heavy against her chest, mocking her exile. The chain bit into her palm as she gripped it tighter, drawing a thin line of her own blood that froze almost instantly into crimson crystals. The forest loomed ahead, a labyrinth of ancient evergreens bowed under the weight of snow, their branches whispering secrets to the gale. Alara had been cast out at dusk, the clan's elders dragging her from the shadowed halls of their ice-carved citadel. Her father's voice, once a rumble of thunder, had cracked with feigned regret. "The Dosa demands purity, daughter. Your weakness invites ruin." They had stripped her of her silken robes, leaving her in a tattered shift that offered no shield against the encroaching night. No provisions, no farewell, only the echo of slamming gates and the howls of the pack she could no longer call her own. She collapsed against a boulder, the stone's icy bite jolting through her like a lover's betrayal. Tears froze on her lashes, but she refused to let them fall fully. Vampires did not weep, or so the old tales insisted. Yet Alara felt the pull of something deeper than thirst, a hollow ache in her soul, the Omega's curse that made her crave connection even as it doomed her to rejection. The moon above, bloated and red, watched indifferently, its light filtering through the clouds in shafts that painted the snow in hues of blood and bone. Weavos echoed from the valleys below, not the triumphant cries of her clan, but the mournful wails of wild wolves, guardians of the untamed wilds. In the distance, the flicker of torchlight danced like dying stars, perhaps a hunting party, come to ensure her end, or wanderers from the human realms, ignorant of the shadows that prowled these heights. Ilara's fangs ached, a reminder of her heritage, but the hunger was dulled by despair. She had always been the outlier, her senses attuned not to the hunt, but to the subtle threads of fate, whispers of destiny that others dismissed as weakness. The elders had seen it as omen. An Omega vampire, born under a lunar eclipse, whose blood sang of redemption rather than conquest. "She will dilute our strength," they had decreed, fearing the vulnerability she embodied. Rising unsteadily, Alara pressed on, the amulet swaying like a pendulum against her heart. The wind shifted, carrying a new scent, smoke, mingled with the metallic tang of fresh blood and the earthy musk of alpha dominance. Her instincts stirred, a forbidden curiosity blooming amid the fear. Who ventured into these forsaken wilds under such a moon? Not her kin, for they feared the curse that lingered here, an ancient malediction said to twist the mighty into beasts of regret. The path dipped into a ravine, where steam rose from geothermal vents, melting patches of snow into treacherous slush. Alara's steps faltered as she crested a ridge, her gaze drawn to a faint glow ahead, a campfire nestled in a sheltered hollow, its flames leaping defiantly against the dark. Shadows moved there, armored figures huddled against the cold, their breaths visible in the firelight. At the center sat a man. No, an alpha king by the bearing of his broad shoulders and the silver torque at his neck, etched with runes of forgotten oaths. His face was half hidden by a hood, but even from afar, Alara sensed the weight he carried, a melancholy aura that mirrored her own exile. He turned then, as if sensing her presence, his eyes catching the moonlight like polished steel. A jolt passed through her, instinctive and unwelcome, an Omega's pull toward the broken Alpha born of shared wounds. But she shrank back into the shadows, heart pounding. To approach was to invite death, to flee was to embrace it alone. The amulet warmed against her skin, the drop of blood within pulsing faintly, as if awakening to some unspoken call. The wind carried his voice, low and commanding, laced with exhaustion. Double the watch. The curse stirs tonight. His people, warriors marked by the insignia of the Ironclaw realm, nodded, their faces gaunt with the pallor of a plague that no blade could fell. Ilara's breath hitched. Whispers of the Ironclaw curse had reached even the vampire clans, a blight upon their lands, devouring life from the soil and veins alike, born of a king's ancient sin. Only a union with forbidden blood could break it, they said, blood like hers, the outcast's elixir. She lingered in the tree line, torn between the storm's fury and the fire's fragile promise. The moon dipped lower, casting long shadows that danced like specters of choice. In that moment, exile felt not like an end, but the cruel prelude to a destiny woven in blood and frost. Alara's pulse thrummed against the amulet's chain, a faint echo of the blood drop within, as if it sensed the Alpha's gaze piercing the veil of night. She should have fled deeper into the ravine, where the geothermal steam cloaked the world in veils of mist, and the earth's hidden fires offered no warmth to the damned. But her feet, traitorous and numb, rooted her to the snow-dusted ridge. The campfire's glow beckoned like a siren's call, flames twisting in the wind to paint the hollow in strokes of amber and shadow. The Alpha King's warriors stirred, their armor clinking softly like the tolling of distant bells. But it was his silhouette that held her captive, broad, unyielding, yet bowed by an invisible yoke. She edged closer. The crunch of snow under her shift muffled by the gale's relentless howl. Fear coiled in her gut, sharp as fangs, whispering of the perils in approaching strangers. Humans who hunted her kind with silver and fire, or worse, rival clans who would drain her dry for the impurity in her veins. Yet curiosity, that forbidden spark of her Omega nature, flickered brighter. The scent of him intensified, smoke-wreathed pine, the salt of sweat, and beneath it all, the acrid bite of curse-tainted blood. It stirred something primal in her, a recognition that clashed against her isolation like thunder on ice. From the tree line she watched as he rose, his cloak falling back to reveal a face etched by storms both outer and inner. King Thorn of the Ironclaw realm. She realized with a jolt his features known from the whispered tales that crossed even the vampire borders. A ruler forged in the fires of endless wars, his silver torque gleaming like a noose of duty. His eyes, storm-gray and haunted, scanned the darkness, lingering where she hid. A scar traced his jaw, pale against the stubble, a remnant of battles that had claimed more than flesh. He was no mere wanderer. This was a king in exile of his own making, fleeing the blight that gnawed at his lands like a ravenous shadow. "The wind carries a stranger's breath," he murmured to his captain, a grizzled warrior whose hand instinctively gripped his sword hilt. Thorn's voice was a low rumble, resonant as the earth's core, laced with the melancholy of one who had commanded legions, yet knelt before fate's cruel altar. Not wolf, not beast, something other. Alara's breath caught, the cold air burning her lungs. She pressed against a gnarled pine, its bark rough and resinous under her palms, but the movement betrayed her. A twig snapped, sharp as a breaking bone. The warriors whirled, torches raised high, their flames hissing against the snowflakes that swirled like ash from a dying pyre. Thorn's hand shot up, stilling them, his gaze locking onto her hiding place with unerring precision. "Show yourself!" he commanded, not with the bark of authority, but the quiet steel of a man who had lost too much to threats. She emerged slowly, the wind whipping her tattered shift around her legs like spectral wings. The moonlight bathed her in silver, highlighting the pallor of her skin and the dark hollows beneath her eyes. Her fangs glinted faintly as she parted her lips, but she kept them sheathed, a deliberate vulnerability. The amulet swung free, catching the firelight, the blood drop within seeming to pulse with her quickened heart. Thorn's warriors tensed, murmurs rippling through them. "Vampire!" one hissed, crossing himself against the old wards, but the king stepped forward, undaunted, his presence a bulwark against their fear. Up close, the curse marked him vividly. Veins like fractured obsidian traced his neck, pulsing with a sickly glow under the skin, the blight's insidious claim. His people suffered it too, their faces gaunt, eyes fever-bright. Ilara's gaze met his, and the connection struck like lightning, instinctive, raw, a thread of shared exile weaving between them. She saw the guilt in his eyes, the weight of a realm dying because of his choices. Alliances forged in desperation, a marriage pact with her own clan to break the curse through forbidden union. Whispers had reached her even in the Crimson Vale's halls, of the Iron Claw King's bargain with her father, offering gold and land for a princess's hand, only for the elders to deem her unfit, her blood too diluted for such a right. "You trespass on peril's edge," Thorn said, his voice softening as he took in her disheveled form, the frost-kissed bruises on her arms from the clan's rough expulsion. No accusation, only a weary curiosity that mirrored her own. He did not draw his blade, though his hand rested near it, a king's caution honed by betrayal. Ilara lifted her chin, the wind tearing at her hair like jealous fingers. "As do you, king of the withered throne. This wild claims no kings, only the lost." Her words carried the bite of defiance, but beneath it trembled the Omega's fear, of rejection anew, of being seen as the weakness her kin had branded her. The pull toward him was undeniable, a magnetic ache in her chest, urging her to bridge the chasm. Yet she denied it, rationalizing it as survival's illusion, the storm's madness playing tricks on a forsaken mind. He studied her, the firelight dancing in his eyes, revealing depths of sorrow she recognized all too well. Lost, perhaps, but not forsaken. Not yet. A howl pierced the night, distant and mournful, as if the moon itself wept for the wounds they both bore. Thorn glanced at the amulet, his brow furrowing at its glow. That mark. It sings of blood older than these peaks. What brings a daughter of the night to our fire's mercy? She hesitated, the cold seeping deeper, her body craving the warmth she dared not seek. The connection hummed, born of fear and that treacherous curiosity, binding them in the moon's indifferent gaze. But to answer was to invite entanglement, to step from exile into a destiny stained with more blood than her own. And now, I invite you to leave a trace of your presence in the comments. Tell us where in the world you're watching from, and the exact hour you hear this story. We wish to know how far these northern confessions travel, and at what moments of the night they find you. The flames crackled like brittle bones underfoot, casting erratic shadows that clawed at the snow-swept hollow, as if the night itself conspired to draw Ilara nearer. She stood frozen at the edge of the firelight, the Alpha King's gaze a tangible weight upon her, probing the fragility she wore like a second skin. The wind, ever the merciless herald, whipped through the ravine, carrying the distant clamor of pursuit, faint at first, like the rumble of thunder trapped in the earth's veins, but growing insistent. Her clan's hunters, she knew. They would not leave an exile to fade quietly, lest her impurity taint the lunar pact they revered. The amulet at her throat pulsed warmer now, the drop of her mother's blood stirring as if alive, a silent sentinel against the encroaching dark. Thorn's warriors shifted uneasily, their hands hovering over hilts etched with iron runes, eyes narrowing at the vampire before them. Whispers slithered through the group like serpents in the underbrush. "Night Witch," one spat, his breath fogging the air thick with suspicion. But the king raised a gauntleted hand, silencing them with the authority of one who had stared down greater tempests. His storm-gray eyes held hers, not with the feral hunger of a predator, but the quiet assessment of a soul adrift, seeking anchor in the storm. "Come to the fire," he said, his voice a low timbre that cut through the gale, laced with the melancholy of unspoken burdens. "The cold claims no favorites here." Ilara's instincts screamed retreat, the omega within her recoiling from the vulnerability of trust. Yet the pull was inexorable, woven from the shared scent of exile and the faint cursed thrum in his veins that echoed her own tainted blood. She stepped forward, each crunch of snow a reluctant surrender until the heat kissed her chilled flesh like a forbidden caress. The warriors parted reluctantly, forming a wary circle, their torches sputtering in the wind that now howled with urgency. Thorn shrugged off his cloak, a heavy mantle of wolf fur lined with silver thread, and draped it over her shoulders without a word. The warmth enveloped her, carrying his essence, earth and iron, mingled with the faint rot of the blight that clawed at his realm. It was a gesture of mercy, not conquest, and in that moment, empathy flickered to life between them, fragile as the steam rising from the geothermal vents nearby. She sank onto a log by the fire, the amulet nestling against her chest like a beating heart. Thorn settled across from her, his broad frame casting a long shadow that danced with the flames. Up close, the curse etched deeper lines into his face, obsidian veins forking across his temple like cracks in marble, pulsing faintly under the moon's crimson gaze. His people watched from the periphery, their gaunt features illuminated in stark relief, soldiers who had marched for glory, now reduced to guardians of a dying legacy. "The Iron Claw curse," Ilara murmured, her voice barely above the fire's whisper. "It devours from within, my clan." They spoke of it in hushed tones, a king's folly unbound. Thorn's jaw tightened, the scar along it silvering in the firelight. Guilt shadowed his eyes, a profound melancholy born of choices that had chained him to this frozen odyssey. "Folly, aye," he admitted, his tone resonant with the weight of thrones forsaken. "I sought alliance with your crimson veil, bargaining for a union to quench the blight. Your blood, they promised, pure night essence to cleanse the poison. But they sent no bride, only riddles and silence." He glanced at the amulet, its crescent moon catching the flames in a hypnotic gleam. "And now, fate delivers an outcast to our pyre. The Deusa mocks us both." The distant clamor swelled, resolving into the sharp cries of hounds and the metallic ring of blades on stone. Her clan's enforcers, relentless in their purge. Ilara's fangs ached, a surge of defensive fire igniting in her veins despite the chill. Thorn rose swiftly, signaling his men with a nod that brooked no delay. "To arms," he commanded, his voice stealing into the timbre of command, yet tempered by the ethical core that defined him, a king who led not through tyranny, but through the quiet conviction of duty. His warriors formed a perimeter, shields interlocking like the scales of some ancient beast, torches blazing defiance against the encroaching night. Ilara stood with them, the borrowed cloak billowing like wings of shadow. The first attackers crested the ridge, cloaked figures with eyes glowing feral red, their fangs bared in ritual fury. "The impure flees no further," their leader snarled. A hulking beta whose voice echoed the elder's decree. Arrows whistled through the air, one grazing Alara's arm, drawing a thin rivulet of blood that steamed on the snow. Pain bloomed, sharp and visceral, but Thorn was there in an instant, his sword a blur of silver as he parried the assault. "She stands with us now," he growled, positioning himself between her and the onslaught, his body a bulwark of unyielding resolve. The battle erupted in a symphony of chaos, steel clashing against claw, grunts mingling with the wind's wail, blood spraying dark against the white expanse. Ilara fought not with the savage grace of her kin, but with an instinctive ferocity born of survival, her movements fluid as mist. She dodged a lunging foe, her hand brushing thorns as he struck down another, the contact electric, forging the first thread of their bond. Empathy surged through her, raw and unbidden. She saw the guilt in his every swing, the melancholy of a ruler who had wed for salvation only to invite deeper ruin. And he, glimpsing her defiance amid the fray, recognized the strength in her weakness, the Omega's quiet fire that burned brighter than conquest. As the last attacker fell, crumpling into the snow with a gurgling sigh, the hollow fell silent save for the ragged breaths of the victors. Thorn sheathed his blade, turning to Alara with eyes softened by the forge of shared peril. A gash marred his forearm, curse veins flaring brighter, but he ignored it, pressing a cloth to her wound instead. "You fight like one who has lost everything," he said softly, his touch lingering, warm against the cold bite of her skin. "Yet here you stand, unbowed." The amulet warmed anew, the blood drop within resonating with the crimson splatters on the snow, as if the moon itself approved this fragile alliance. Alara met his gaze, the bond deepening from mere empathy to something visceral, a tether of understanding forged in fire and frost. Fear still lingered, rationalized as the storm's aftershock, but curiosity had bloomed into quiet acceptance. In his presence, exile felt less like a void and more like the dawn of redemption, though the night whispered of trials yet to come. The wind subsided to a mournful sigh, weavos echoing from the peaks as if the wilds bore witness. Thorn's hand brushed hers again, a silent vow amid the bloodied snow, binding their wounds in the moon's eternal vigil. But as the first flakes of a new squall dusted the carnage, Alara wondered if this refuge was salvation or merely the prelude to a deeper curse, one where love demanded the ultimate price. The steam from the geothermal vents curled like spectral fingers through the bloodied hollow, mingling with the acrid scent of scorched fur and iron-tanged wounds. Ilara's arm throbbed where the arrow had grazed her, the thin line of crimson now crusted with frost under Thorn's careful binding. His touch lingered, a warmth that seeped beyond flesh, stirring the amulet against her chest into a subtle thrum, as if the drop of her mother's blood sensed the fragile bridge forming between them. The warriors slumped against boulders and felled pines, their breaths ragged plumes in the chill air, eyes hollow with the exhaustion of survival. The moon hung low, its crimson hue deepening to a bruised violet, casting the carnage in shades of regret and revelation. Thorn withdrew his hand slowly, his storm-gray eyes searching hers with an intensity that unraveled her defenses. The curse's obsidian veins pulsed brighter along his forearm, the gash he had ignored now weeping a dark ichor that sizzled faintly on the snow. "Rest here," he murmured, his voice a gravelly anchor amid the settling silence, laced with the melancholy of a king who had bartered his soul for his people's dawn. "The night owes us that much." He turned to his captain, issuing quiet orders for watches and salves, his broad shoulders bearing the weight of command like an ill-fitted crown. Yet in the flicker of torchlight, Ilara saw the cracks, the ethical torment of a ruler whose alliances had invited this blight, whose marriage pact with her clan now dangled like a noose woven from shattered oaths. She nodded, sinking back onto the log, the borrowed cloak enveloping her like a shroud of borrowed strength. The fire popped and hissed, devouring resinous branches that released bursts of pine-scented smoke, veiling the hollow in a hazy shroud. Empathy had taken root in the fray, transforming fear into a tentative bond, but now, in the aftermath, curiosity gnawed deeper, urging her toward truths she had long buried. The amulet grew warmer, insistent, its silver crescent pressing against her skin as if awakening from slumber. Ilara traced its edges with trembling fingers, the preserved blood drop within gleaming like a captive star. A symbol of the lunar pact her clan had twisted into chains of purity. As the warriors tended their injuries, sharing meager rations of dried meat and herbal brews that masked the curse's bitter undercurrent, Thorn returned to her side. He carried a water skin, offering it without flourish, his presence a quiet bulwark against the wind's renewed whisper. "Your blood," he said softly, settling beside her, the heat of his body cutting through the cold like a blade through mist. "It steams on the snow, unyielding to the frost, not like ours." His gaze dropped to the amulet, curiosity mirroring her own, though shadowed by the guilt that etched his features. He had wed a phantom bride from the Crimson Veil to break the blight, a union scripted in desperation, promising the infusion of vampire essence to purify his realm's poisoned veins. Yet the elders had spurned the pact, deeming no princess worthy if her blood carried the Omega's taint. And now, fate had delivered her, the rejected daughter, into his exile. Ilara accepted the waterskin, her fangs grazing her lip as she drank, the cool liquid a stark contrast to the fire building within. "My blood is no elixir," she replied, her voice a hushed tremor, intimate in the fire's glow. "It's diluted," they said, human frailty woven into the night, the Deusa's gift turned curse. But even as she spoke, doubt flickered. The amulet's pulse quickened, syncing with her heartbeat, and a faint vision stirred at the edges of her mind, whispers of paths unseen, threads of destiny pulling taut. She had always sensed them, these subtle currents, dismissed by her kin as the Omega's delusion. Yet here, under Thorn's gaze, they sharpened, like moonlight piercing cloud. The night deepened, the uivos of distant wolves rising in a mournful chorus, as if the wilds mourned the blood spilled under the moon's watchful eye. One of Thorn's warriors cried out suddenly, convulsing by the fire's edge, the curse flaring through him like black lightning. His veins bulged, obsidian and furious, his skin paling to the hue of death. Panic rippled through the group, hands reaching for talismans and blades, but Thorn was already there, cradling the man's head, his face a mask of profound sorrow. "Hold, brother," he urged, his voice steady yet laced with the raw edge of failure. "The dawn will not claim you yet." But the warrior's eyes rolled back, foam flecking his lips, the blight devouring him from within, a visceral reminder of the realm's slow unraveling, fields withered to ash, rivers choked with decay, all because of a king's ancient sin, a betrayal in youth that had invoked the Deusa's wrath. Ilara watched, the amulet burning now, a heat that spread through her veins like liquid fire. Instinct surged, unbidden and fierce, the hidden gift of her bloodline, the Pathfinder's sight, manifesting in a rush of clarity. Visions cascaded, the curse's origin, a shadowed ritual where Thorn's sire had slain a sacred guardian under a blood moon, binding the land to eternal blight. And woven through it, her role, the Omega's blood, impure yet pure in its empathy, the key to unbinding the pact. Not through conquest, but redemption, a union of wills, her essence mingling with his to heal the wound at the realm's heart. She gasped, clutching the amulet, the drop of blood within glowing faintly, illuminating the hollow in ethereal silver. Thorn's head snapped toward her, his eyes widening as the warrior stilled, the crisis ebbing not from his command, but from the subtle shift in the air. the amulet's light reaching out like tendrils, soothing the curse's grip. The man's breathing steadied, color returning to his cheeks as if an unseen hand had drawn the poison back. "What sorcery is this?" Thorn whispered, rising to kneel before her, his hand hovering near the amulet, reverence tempering the alpha's intensity. In that moment, realization dawned in his gaze, profound and piercing. She was no mere outcast, but the Deuce's revelation, the blood that could save his people. Not as a bride bartered, but as a partner chosen by fate. Alara met his eyes, the visions fading, but the truth lingering, a weight both terrifying and liberating. The bond deepened, no longer resisted, but acknowledged her gift a bridge from exile to purpose. Yet doubt whispered, was this destiny's mercy or another chain? The moon watched, silent arbiter, as the fire crackled on, flames dancing like harbingers of trials yet to unfold. Thorn's fingers brushed hers, a vow unspoken, the amulet's glow fading to a steady pulse, blood calling to blood, redemption's fragile dawn breaking through the frost. The wind stirred the embers, carrying the scent of renewal amid the ruin, but Alara knew the path ahead demanded more than sight. It required surrender, a choice between the solitude of rejection and the fire of shared fate. Comment Luna if you'd walk through the storm for someone who saw your worth. The ravine's shadows lengthened like accusing fingers under the moon's unyielding scrutiny, the geothermal vents exhaling plumes of sulphurous breath that mingled with the metallic reek of drying blood. Ilara's visions lingered in her veins like echoes of a half-remembered dream, the amulet's warmth a persistent throb against her chest, as if the drop of her mother's blood demanded reckoning. Thorn's touch had withdrawn, but its imprint burned, a king's restrained hunger, tempered by the ethical forge of his guilt, now laced with awe at the revelation she embodied. His people stirred uneasily around the fire, their eyes darting between her and the king, whispers threading through the crackle of flames like threads of unraveling fate. The warrior he had saved lay pale but breathing, the curse's grip loosened by her unwitting grace, yet the hollow thrummed with unspoken questions. Was she salvation or the harbinger of deeper ruin? Thorn rose, his silhouette towering against the violet-tinged sky, the silver torque at his neck catching the moonlight in fractured glints. "We cannot linger," he said, his voice a resonant murmur that carried the weight of thrones toppled by his own hand. The melancholy in his eyes deepened, shadows of the past coiling like the obsidian veins that marred his skin. He had confessed fragments in the fire's hush. His youth's betrayal, a pact with shadow sorcerers to seize power, invoking the Deuce's curse upon his realm. The marriage to a vampire princess had been his atonement's desperate stroke, a union to infuse Ironclaw with Nightblood's purity, only for the Crimson Veil to withhold their prize. Now, Ilara's emergence felt like the Deuce's cruel jest, offering the key in the form of the rejected Omega, her diluted essence, the very elixir his people craved. She stood, the borrowed cloak slipping from her shoulders like shed inhibitions, the cold reclaiming her skin in prickling waves. The amulet swung free, its crescent moon pulsing in rhythm with the distant weavos that swelled from the peaks, wolves or worse, harbingers of the confrontation she had dreaded. Her gift, the Pathfinder's sight, sharpened the air into crystalline clarity. Visions of her clan's citadel, its ice-hewn spires piercing the storm clouds, and at its heart, the traitor who had sealed her exile. Not her father alone, but his beta advisor, Lord Varric, whose ambition had twisted the Elder's fears into a blade. Varric, with his eyes like polished obsidian, had whispered of omens, claiming her blood would weaken the lunar pact, all to hoard the Alliance's gold for his own ascent. He was the rival Alpha in shadow, coveting Thorn's throne through sabotage, his spies already weaving webs across the borders. The wind shifted, carrying the acrid tang of approaching torches. Her kin, relentless in their purge, drawn by the blood spilled in the hollow. Alara's fangs extended instinctively. a surge of defensive fire clashing with the Omega's ache for flight. "They come for me," she whispered, her voice intimate and raw, laced with the tremor of one who had tasted rejection's bitter chalice too often. Thorn's hand found hers, calloused and steady, a bridge of iron will amid the gathering storm. The connection, once resisted as survival's mirage, now anchored her. Yet it demanded a choice: to flee into solitude's embrace, reclaiming her freedom in the wild's indifferent maw, or to stand with him, weaving love's fragile thread into war's brutal loom. The first shadows crested the ridge, cloaked figures materializing from the swirling snow like specters unchained. At their fore rode Lord Varric, mounted on a spectral steed whose eyes glowed with cursed fire, his armor etched with crimson veil runes that gleamed red as fresh spilled life. Flanking him were enforcers, betas with fangs bared and blades drawn, their howls piercing the night like shattered glass. "The impure returns to the fold," Varric snarled, his voice a venomous silk that slithered through the gale, eyes locking on Alara with predatory glee. "Or does she cower behind human refuse? The Deusa demands your end, Omega. Your blood taints the pact we forged without you." Thorn stepped forward, his sword unsheathed in a fluid arc, the steel singing against the scabbard like a vow renewed. His warriors rallied behind him, shields raised in a wall of unyielding steel, but his gaze never left Varric. Recognition flashing in the storm-gray depths, the traitor's hand in the failed marriage pact, poison slipped into Ironclaw's wells to hasten the blight. "You," Thorn growled, his tone laced with the profound guilt of a king who had invited such serpents into his hall. "Your whispers poisoned the alliance before it breathed, but no more. She is no taint. She is the revelation your greed blinded you to." The confrontation erupted in a visceral storm. Varric's forces lunged, claws raking the snow into crimson furrows, while Thorn's men met them with disciplined fury, blades clashing in a symphony of sparks and grunts. Alara moved through the fray like mist given form, her movements guided by the Pathfinder's sight, visions flashing of strikes evaded, paths of mercy amid the carnage. She parried a beta's thrust, her own blade, a shard scavenged from the hollow, slicing clean, but spared the killing blow, whispering, "Yield, brother of the Veil, this war devours its own." Yet Varric circled her, his presence a suffocating shadow, his words a barrage of moral barbs. "Love this, Alpha? It chains you, fool. Freedom lies in the wilds, unburdened by his dying realm. Or forgive us, return, and I'll spare your pet king." Thorn fought toward her, his form a whirlwind of controlled power, each swing burdened by ethical restraint. He felled foes but spared the fallen, his melancholy a blade sharper than steel. A gash opened across his shoulder, curse veins flaring like molten rivers, drawing a hiss of pain that twisted Alara's heart. The amulet burned fiercely now, the blood drop within illuminating the chaos in silver pulses, revealing Varric's treachery in stark vision. His secret pact with rival realms, aiming to claim both thrones through orchestrated ruin. The choice crystallized in her soul, love or freedom, forgiveness or war. To forgive Varric would betray Thorn's people, dooming them to the Blight's embrace. To choose war meant embracing the violence her Omega spirit abhorred, yet in Thorn's eyes she saw redemption's call. Compassion not as weakness, but the strength to heal through union, not conquest. Varric lunged, his claws aimed at her throat, but Alara sidestepped, the amulet's glow surging to blind him momentarily. Thorn struck true, disarming the traitor with a blow that sent him sprawling into the snow, blade at his neck. "End it!" Varric spat, eyes wild with defiance. Thorn hesitated, the king's ethical core warring with the Alpha's instinct, guilt etching deeper lines into his face. Alara knelt beside him, her hand on his arm, the bond a visceral anchor. "Mercy," she urged, voice trembling with the philosophy of her hidden gift. "Not for him, but for us. Kill him, and we become the monsters they fear. Forgive and break the cycle. Let his confession shatter the lies." The wind howled its judgment, Weavos rising in approval or lament, as Varroc's forces faltered, witnessing their lord's fall. Thorn's blade lowered, not in weakness, but choice, the moral pivot where love demanded forgiveness over vengeance, freedom yielding to shared destiny. Varroc snarled a curse, but truth spilled from him under the moon's gaze, confessions of sabotage, the elders' complicity, the gold hoarded in shadowed vaults. His warriors retreated into the storm, the traitor's defeat a fracture in the Crimson Veil's iron hold. Yet as silence reclaimed the hollow, blood steaming on the frost-kissed earth, Ilara felt the dilemma's spiritual weight settle like chains. Had mercy crowned them, or merely delayed the war's shadow? Thorn pulled her close, his breath warm against her temple, the amulet pressing between them like a beating heart. In his embrace, rejection's scars began to mend. But the path to Renascimento whispered of sacrifice yet to come. Blood for blood, love's proof in the Deusa's unforgiving light. The fire sputtered low, embers glowing like eyes of the judged, as Ilara pondered the cost of compassion. Could redemption bloom from such tainted soil? Or would it demand her very essence to save the fallen king? The embers of the dying fire whispered secrets to the frost-kissed earth, their glow a faint requiem for the blood that stained the snow in jagged patterns, like veins of a wounded sky. Ilara knelt in the hollow's cradle, the wind's sigh a mournful veil over the fallen, her hand still warm from Thorn's grasp, though he had pulled away to survey the ravaged perimeter. The amulet hung heavy against her chest, the drop of her mother's blood now a living ember, pulsing with the rhythm of choices yet unmade. Mercy had spared Varroc's life, binding him in chains forged from his own confessions, but the air thrummed with the spiritual toll, a fragile victory that demanded more than steel or fang. The moon, paling to silver as dawn clawed at the horizon, watched with indifferent grace, its light fracturing on the ice-crusted boulders like shattered oaths. Thorn's silhouette cut against the paling sky, his broad frame etched in steel-gray resolve, the curse's obsidian veins forking deeper across his shoulder where the gash wept dark ichor. He turned to her, eyes storm-shadowed, carrying the melancholy of a king who had bartered empires for redemption only to find it in the gaze of an outcast. "We have bought time," he said, his voice a low rumble that stirred the steam from the vents like ghosts roused from slumber. "But the blight hungers still. Your sight revealed the path, Ilara, my blood for yours, union to unbind the Deusa's wrath. Yet I see the war in your eyes. To give yourself to this, is it freedom or another exile?" She rose, the snow yielding softly under her bare feet, each step a tactile echo of rebirth's threshold. The borrowed cloak trailed behind her like a manticore's tail, heavy with the scent of pine and iron, mingling with the coppery tang of spilled life that lingered on her skin. Introspection coiled within her, slow and visceral, as the Pathfinder's gift unfurled once more, visions cascading like moonlight on rippling water. The Ironclaw realm's fields blooming anew under a purified dawn, rivers running clear, but at the cost of her essence, her blood mingling with his in a ritual of sacrifice. Not death, but surrender, the Omega's hidden strength, her diluted veins the pure conduit for compassion's fire. Love was no glittering prize, but a forge of suffering, where choice tempered the soul. What was strength, if not choosing to heal the broken at the expense of self? The warriors gathered the remnants of their camp, silent sentinels whose gaunt faces reflected the realm's slow decay, eyes fever-bright, breaths labored plumes in the chill. One approached Thorn, his voice a hoarse thread. "The horses are spent, my king. The citadel lies 3 days' ride through the passes, but the storm gathers." Thorn nodded, his hand absently tracing the silver torque at his neck, a relic of ancient duties now tarnished by guilt. He had been the architect of his fall, wedding a spectral bride in ritual halls to invoke the vampire pact, only for betrayal to twist it into deeper curse. Now, Alara stood as the unforeseen key, her rejection a mirror to his shame, their bond a tentative bridge over the abyss. Alara stepped closer, the wind tugging at her hair like insistent fingers, carrying distant weavos that swelled into a choral lament from the peaks, wolves or spirits, arbiters of the wild's unyielding law. The amulet burned fiercer, its heat spreading through her like liquid moonlight, awakening the dawn of her bloodline in full. Not mere visions, but a spiritual resonance, drawing the curse's poison toward her as iron to lodestone. She felt it then, the pull, a visceral ache in her core, her fangs retracting as empathy surged, raw and unresisted. Thorn's pain became hers, the weight of his people's fading pulses echoing in her veins, demanding the ultimate proof. Union not as conquest, but as mutual rebirth, her blood the salve for his wound, his redemption the light for her exile. "I was born to wander shadows," she whispered, her voice intimate against the wind's hush, eyes locking with his in the silvered half-light. "Rejected for the frailty they feared, but in you I see no throne, only a man chained by duty's ghost. The deusa does not reward, she tests. If love is redemption, then let it be our choice, not fate's decree, but ours, forged in this frost." Philosophy wove through her words, a quiet mantra, faith against despair, compassion over power. To withhold her blood would grant her liberty, the wild's solitary embrace, but doom his realm to wither, a moral precipice where freedom tasted of isolation's bitter frost. Thorn's breath caught, the melancholy in his gaze fracturing like ice under spring's first thaw. He reached for her, calloused fingers tracing the amulet's chain, the contact electric binding their fates in a current of shared fire. "Every king carries a scar," he murmured, echoing the ancient truth. "And every omega, the grace to mend it. I wed for salvation, but found only deeper night. With you. Perhaps dawn." The warriors paused, sensing the ritual's gravity, forming a silent circle as the first rays pierced the clouds, gilding the snow in hues of ancient gold and deep red. Alara nodded, the choice crystallizing in her soul, a sacrifice of self for Union's healing light. She drew a silver dagger from Thorn's belt, its edge catching the dawn like a promise, and pricked her palm, the blood welling dark and steaming, unyielding to the cold. Thorn mirrored her, his ichor mingling with hers over the amulet, the drop within flaring brilliant as they pressed it to their joined wounds. Pain bloomed, sharp and alchemical, the curse recoiling like smoke before flame, obsidian veins fading from his skin, the air shimmering with released energy, visions confirming the unbinding, fields greening in her mind's eye, the deusa's pact renewed through empathy's pure forge. The wind stilled, weavos fading to silence, the hollow bathed in rebirth's glow. Thorn pulled her into his arms, their breaths sinking in the quiet. The bond no longer resisted but embraced, a love born of suffering, proven in choice. Exile's scars softened, rejection yielding to destiny's tender revelation, their union the flame that thawed the eternal winter. Yet in the intimacy of that embrace, Alara felt the spiritual echo. Redemption was no end, but a beginning where every healed wound whispered of trials yet to come, under the moon's eternal vigil. The amulet cooled against her heart, a symbol reborn, as dawn's light crested the peaks, painting their path forward in strokes of hope forged from blood and frost. If your heart beat alongside ours, like, comment, and subscribe. Because every soul that joins our moon keeps the flame of redemption alive.